this is the first time where I was looking at Yolanda's background and the things that she's done and the skills that she has and the things that have happened in her life, and I seriously did not know where to start. The breadth and depth of her life experience is so enormous, is so significant in so many different ways. I'm like, I don't want to talk. I want somebody else to talk because I'm afraid I will not do her justice. She has been a volunteer in her life, a mentor in her life. She has been a director of marketing for the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. She's been a journalist. She's hosted TV shows. She's been a reporter for TV shows. She's the first Mexican-American woman to found, own, and operate a television station in the United States. She has been a civic leader in the Latin community. She's one of the founders and serves on the board of the trustees for La Plaza that just had its opening. I know several of you were at the La Plaza opening, which I heard was quite a shindig. So she is a very, very impressive person. And I wanted to just read something because y'all know, probably if you read the little bit that we wrote about her, is that she can't see. She's blind. So there's this wonderful article in the Denver Post. If anybody's interested, I highly recommend it to you because it's a wonderful synopsis of not only kind of the breadth and depth of her life experience, but also the dealing with this issue of blindness. And it's funny, she says, and you'll get a little flavor for who she is. It says, the assumption is you can't do anything when you can't see. But I'm still here. I still have a brain. I just can't see. So with that, I'd like to have you welcome with me Ms. Yolanda Nava.
Well, thank you, Andrea. We had a wonderful little visit just before, I came into this room, and it was really lovely to encounter. This is what it's all about, is nurturing and mentoring and opening doors so that more people can come and walk through those doors and achieve here. It's when I was directing development for the first family literacy program, which operated within the LA Unified School District Adult Division. It was a pilot program, and it went from being one pilot program to more than 80, projects throughout the city and county schools of family literacy. And we had 4 components. We had early childhood development, business and academic training for parents, parent-child time together, and the early parent-child time together, and then the early childhood development piece, 4 components. And Toyota Families for Learning was one of our first funders. And so you see, I had that connection for like the 9 years that I was involved with that project, and very impressed by the work that Toyota was doing to build literacy, to strengthen families, to enhance educational opportunities for people, diverse peoples across this country. And so that's my Toyota connection. I would like to thank Toyota for that involvement and for supporting that family literacy program, which has grown into just being this incredible model for family literacy, which of course is very important. Educating children is good, but we have to help the parents be better parents and encourage them to support their children's academic and social development. So there's that piece. Andrea, gave you a thumbnail sketch of my life, and I'd like to go a little bit further back because I think it helps to know what our roots are. And mine are, I'm the first generation daughter, only child, of immigrant parents from Chihuahua, Mexico. And my parents came to this country after the Mexican Revolution during the 1920s. And I was a post-war baby. My mother wrote my father and said, "You better bring me a baby when you come home on leave or I'm going to divorce you," because she was already pushing 35. And it was a depression, they didn't have any money, there was a war, it wasn't the best time to be having a lot of babies. And so she put it to the line, and he came home and brought her a baby. And I was born on Thanksgiving Day. I was born on Thanksgiving Day. So for a woman 35, and that was old in that era, I was a blessing in disguise, and I'm sure she dreaded it sometimes after that because I really gave my mother a run for her money. And, it was an interesting time to be born, and that was during, after the war, and of course after the Sleepy Lagoon riots, where U.S. naval men were beating up Pachucos, Mexican Americans, on the streets of Los Angeles. It was a very rough time, a very difficult time. And there was a lot of hope and promise after the war in the early 1950s, and there was also a lot of prejudice and racism. And so I grew up as this, child in Los Angeles, and my parents, fostered my education. My dad was a journalist, my mother was a seamstress, and they valued education, and they tried to give me every opportunity possible. And my mother tried to balance the two sides. I had instruction in Spanish dance, flamenco, and flamenco ballet with Trinidad Goni on the 4th and Broadway in downtown Los Angeles. And she also had me in Mexican folkloric dancing group, so that I got the Mexican side. And we used to perform at the Santa Barbara Fiesta Days. And so I loved dancing, and I had this bridge between the Spanish father and the Indian, the Mexican mother. And that was very integrated. I didn't know this at the time growing up, but as an adult, I feel a sense of honor towards both of my sides. In the Chicano movement, there was some division in this, and we rejected the Spanish, the European. It was all in, the Indian. And both are part of who we are as mestizos, as people of European and indigenous descent, as Mexicanos, as people from the Caribbean, as people from Latin America, and of course Spain and Portugal. And so that dual education that I had was very, very important, I think, to who I am and how I see the world today, because I don't feel fragmented. I did at times. I used to feel a tremendous sense of what would the word be? I wouldn't say it was as harsh as shame, but it's uncertainty and lack of confidence in who I was as a young Mexican-American girl because of the times that I grew up in. And it wasn't until my mother took me to Mexico City, where she still has much family, and the family there is affluent. The father was a senator under President Aleman, and of course in Mexican politics, people, there's more of these. And so there was, they became affluent. And when I went to my cousin's home, which was in the estate section of Polanco in Mexico City, and I saw their home and how they lived, and I went to the first thing when we landed in Mexico City is my cousin Yolanda, also Yolanda, took my mother and I to the Museum of Anthropology, the Museo de Antropología in Mexico City, where they have these different salons, the Olmec, the Toltec, the Aztec, the Maya, and you go into these different salons of incredible artifacts. The Olmec head, the big Indian head, with that face, that magnificent Olmec face. The Aztec sun. I mean, just these are some of the images that I still remember. Bone fragments, gold, jade, all these things that are part of these very rich ancient civilizations, among the major 7 civilizations of the world. And I was so proud to be of Mexican heritage. And as we listened to the music, and as we went into the restaurants, and as I shared stories with my cousins there in Mexico City, I came back to the United States and I said, why wasn't I taught all of this as a young girl? Why wasn't I taught to be proud of who I am? And that changed my life, and I was at UCLA at the time, and I got involved in MECHA, the Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán. And I was never a radical. I've always been a nice, middle-class, middle-ground girl. I was raised as a Republican. I'm a Democrat, but I was raised as a Republican. I can go both ways. And also visa-free and all the rest of it. But being libertarian, it's all been, part of the political, growth. But being in that setting with an activist student body, and I discovered that after I became a graduate student, and I went back to UCLA as a Danforth Foundation Fellow, that I then got immersed and got involved with other Chicano students, graduate students, and began to learn about my culture and read the history books and the stories and the discrepancies between what we were taught in school and what actually happened in history that marks who we are as Latin people, Latinos in the United States. So with that little background, I'd like to segue into, the ideas and the thoughts that I would like to share with you this morning. Hispanics are a people on the move. And if you look at the annals of history, when the first Spaniards came to the New World to discover and conquer and bring a new civilization to the Americas and to the rest of the globe that they encountered, to the Mexican Revolution, to today, Hispanics have been contributing to the arts, culture, religion, science, technology, literature, humanities within the Americas and within these United States. We have brought richness to the Americas as Hispanics, as Latinos. 3 centuries of Spanish rule in what is now the southwestern United States, 5 southwestern states, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Texas. And then later, after 3 centuries, when Mexico defeated the Spanish, sent them back and became independent from Spain, when Mexico took over in 1821, this was part of Mexico. These critical facts shape the entire border dialogue and discussion. And unfortunately, many people, especially on the East Coast Beltway, do not understand that the Spaniards were in the Americas for 100 years before Jamestown in the early 1600s and made an incredibly rich contribution to civilization. They brought culture, arts, religion, social organization to the New World, and things were built from there. For any of you that have traveled in Mexico or Latin America, you know what I'm talking about. The architecture, the art, the people, the music, everything is incredible. The cities are well laid out, they're thought, they're planned, and then there are value systems that are in place throughout Latin America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. So this richness of culture that is the Hispanic culture and impact upon the Americas is not shared in the media for the most part, unless you happen to see a travel log or something that perhaps gives credit to the culture. But instead we have this perception of Latinos as the great unwashed, as poor, as drug dealers, as people who take the jobs from American citizens. As if anybody wants to pick strawberries, and it's backbreaking, sweat-inducing work. But the stereotype, the drug dealer, the illegal immigrant, the illegal, the alien, the foreign one, the undesirable, is how the media tends to blanket the Latino Hispanic population. And it denigrates each and all of us, whatever our walk of life is, when a portion of the group is denigrated in the way that many immigrants and many people of Mexican descent and other Latino descent have been denigrated. It's like there's this incredible richness of culture. If you look, and one of the things I want to talk about today is if you look at the contributions of Latinos and Hispanics in the United States, it's very rich. And we have achieved tremendous heights here. A tremendous amount of assimilation, a tremendous amount of growth and opportunity, high education levels, professional levels in all walks of life. We have scholars and scientists, we have artists and astronauts. Do we read about that or hear about that in the media? Not for the most part. And so there's a disconnect between the reality of our assimilation and progress within the United States and the immigrant bashing that tends to go on the nightly news. And I ask you to look at that dichotomy. And there are reasons for this. And the battle for power it goes back to the battle for power of the seas and continents between the English and the Spanish, going back to centuries when there was the age of exploration. And that has continued forward through the Spanish-American War, through the Mexican-American War, then the Spanish-American War, and up until the present time, where this prejudice abounds, which should have been wiped out years ago, but it continues because you have a constant influx of of people coming to seek a better life. But all immigrant groups, Irish, German, Jewish, Russian, whatever, have sought a better life in this country. And the Mexicanos, the people from the Caribbean, the people from Central America and South America are no different. They come looking for a better way of life and, in fact, do contribute greatly to this culture. In LA, and I'm sure many of you have seen it, you can go to any street corner and you see three guys, black, African American, Mexicano usually, and the Mexicano is selling oranges. The other guys are asking for a handout. The Mexicano is selling oranges. No language, no skills, probably just a shirt on his back, but he's there working because work is honorable in the Mexican culture. It's one of the virtues that we talk about. And speaking of virtues, the book that I did that was published in 2000, It's All in the Frijoles, is really a book of Latino virtues. And in that book, I interviewed 70 famous Latinos from Isabel Allende to Victor Villaseñor across a variety of fields and countries and backgrounds. And I took stories, songs, poems, and dichos from Spain and Latin America. And I took the interviews of 70 famous Latinos and I edited them down into these bite-sized tidbits of story that talk about how they learned the virtues growing up. Because I identified 14 virtues: respect, responsibility, hard work, loyalty, faith, all the way to charity and chastity, that were taught in the Mexican and Hispanic culture. And it is these principles that provide the qualities of character, the drive for Hispanic people, for Latinos, to overcome tremendous odds. Prejudice, racism, economic injustice, war, famine, all the things that peoples have gone through in the Americas, in the Caribbean, and in the United States. And this is what has empowered us as a people. And I maintain that it is these principles which have driven us and which have allowed us to be successful in these United States. If we look at the history of the border, we have an entirely a story that shapes how we are seen today. Because the border was not there before 1848. This is part of New Spain, as I said. It was part of Mexico for about 25 years before the 1846 Mexican-American War, which started because, we didn't learn this in school, which started because the United States wanted to buy the northern territories of Mexico for $15 million, as they had purchased the Louisiana Purchase, but the Mexican president refused. And the next thing you know, the U.S. Army is crossing into Mexican territory. Shots are fired. A war starts. Mexico is fighting a war in the southern part of its own country. You can't fight a two-front war successfully. And so they lost in the end of the war, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico lost 55% of its landmass. The northern part, and this was part of Manifest Destiny. Eastern settlers then started moving west. Had been and then increased with the railroads in the 1880s and on after that. And so that changes everything. And instead of sending people back to Mexico, there were people who were here, Spanish and people of Spanish and Mexican indigenous heritage that were in the Southwest. And thank you. And so the trajectory of all of this is very important for us to understand, and that we need to look at the history and counter it every chance that we get, because people of Mexican and Spanish and indigenous descent were in the Southwest before Jamestown, before the War of 1846 to 1848, before the border was created in 1848. And these are facts that we need to get out there and talk about, because we have been a part of the development of this country and continent for centuries, and that's a very important fact. The demographics of this country, we now have 50 million people of Mexican or Hispanic descent in the United States. That's about 16% of the total population of the United States. And you wouldn't know it because of the media coverage, but the U.S. Hispanic consumer market is a $1 trillion market. That's a lot of money. We represent a $1 trillion market. And that figure is expected to go up to 1.3 trillion by 2015, which is a 25% increase. And so that powerhouse of economic consumerism and buying power is going to have a tremendous impact on the economic and market trajectory of this country. And it will only grow, especially because there are large numbers of more affluent, high-earning Hispanic families. The number of Hispanic millionaires is growing every year. And so you're going to have a continued growth, economic growth and development. When we look at what all of this brings and the actuality of power and leadership in this country, we have people at the top levels of government. We have now, under Obama's administration, we have 2 cabinet-level secretaries. We have Ken Salazar, who is the Secretary of Transportation, and we have Hilda Solis, former Congresswoman Hilda Solis of Los Angeles, who is now the Secretary of Labor. We have 2. We have 2. And we also have, like I live in New Mexico now, in New Mexico we had Governor Richardson, who was also a candidate for the U.S. presidency against Obama and Hillary Clinton. I happened to work for him in New Hampshire, and I walked precincts there. It was a fascinating experience because they're so well informed in New Hampshire about politics. And they knew Bill Richardson, and he was also a favorite for Secretary of State under Obama, but he served out his second term as governor of New Mexico and did some very good things there, including a fast train from Belen to Albuquerque to Santa Fe. And it was an amazing thing. He just said to his people, I want this train started in 6 months, and doing anything like that fast in New Mexico is almost impossible because it doesn't work that fast. But he did tremendous things. He was also a diplomat, and he had served in the U.S. Congress for a number of terms, and then he was Secretary to the United Nations as well under Clinton, and also Energy Secretary, Cabinet Secretary. So this man is extremely well prepared, and we have people like this that are out there and involved at all levels of influence in government and politics and other fields. We also in Los Angeles have our first Latino mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, who won his second term because he was able to build coalitions between the various ethnic and racial groups in Los Angeles and win the mayoral seat. And these are significant and important strides that we have made. If we look at California has 14 million Hispanics, which is 37% of the population of the state, 2.5 million voters, a very significant voter bloc, 65% Democrats, 18% Republican, and 14% Independent. It's a huge swing vote that can change elections one way or the other. And when 40% of Latinos voted for George W. Bush because of the link-up of family values, which the Republicans pounded home during those elections, George Bush won. And largely because the Hispanic vote went, 40% significant went for George Bush. Those independents and others, went for George Bush. So this is going to be a growing voting bloc, a very important voting bloc. And there is power there. There is influence there. There is, the qualities of unity, the strength of family ties and organizational ties, and the qualities of character which drive leadership and enable people to lead. And we do have more and more Latino Hispanic leaders around the country. If we look at the corporate world, you need only read Hispanic Business, Forbes, and other business magazines to find out who these people are. You need look no further than Toyota Corporation. You have Andrea White, a Latino attorney, who is at the highest levels of corporate influence within a very major corporation within the United States. So we have people in these different places, but we're not hearing about them every day in the news media because the attention goes to the great unwashed, to the immigrant bashing of political rhetoric that we hear about, all of those border issues. So just be aware of that, in your conversations with people, because The fact is that we are out there, we are moving up, we are leading, we are taking our rightful place within these United States. If we look at arts and entertainment, it's the same thing. We have actors and actresses, directors, writers, producers, people like Jennifer Lopez and Salma Hayek and Jacques Barzon and Antonio Banderas, not to mention, thousands of other actors, writers, directors who are doing things on the internet for television. And if they're not household words, they are out there and they are achieving, like my friend Alma Martinez, who was in the original Zoot Suit. She is a theatrical actress, she's done film, she's done television. She now has her PhD in theater and she teaches at Claremont College in Pomona. Last summer, I spent a month with her in Coyoacan, Mexico, where she took Zoot Suit in Spanish to Mexico, and Luis Valdez, the father of Chicano theater, went down to Mexico and directed the Mexican actors in Spanish in Zoot Suit, and I saw it 3 times. It was the most extraordinary theater event of my life, and that includes Broadway. Forget to take the water. And so we have tremendous leadership, and it was so exciting to be in Mexico because it was the first time, I think, that Mexican actors had done a Chicano play. And they did it with it was just right there. It was powerful because there was humor, there was pathos, there was dancing, there was singing, there was drama. It was a very, very powerful production, much, I think, more powerful in Spanish than it was in English. And it was an incredible time. And there was also a symposium that was held where Mexicanos and Chicanos from the United States, Mexican Americans from the United States, were engaging and talking about the issues of class and race and prejudice, pachuquismo, chicanismo, these different themes that we used to talk about back in the 60s, and people, don't talk about too much these days. It doesn't seem, but maybe I'm not on the college campus, so I don't know that. But it was very powerful because there was a real sharing. And as we realized, those of us who are in this country with Mexican roots or any other kind of Latin root, but particularly Mexico because of the nearness, we share with the people there. We are part of the people there, and they are part of us, and they're now starting to learn and understand more about their Mexican-American cousin in the United States, and that's going to forge tremendous strength. Mexicanos working in the United States are sending something like $11 billion back to Mexico every year. That's a tremendous amount of money and resources going to the Mexican people from, relatives that are in this country. So there's a tremendous power base that is being forged between people on both sides of the border. So we have these situations of growth in the corporate world, in the arts and entertainment world, in the political world. And if we look at California with its 14 million Latinos and the power base that we have here in terms of politics alone, we have 61 mayors of California cities. You don't hear about that in the news. We have 6 Congress members, including 2 Portuguese, who are part of the National Hispanic Congressional Caucus. We have 18 members of the California Assembly. It's an 80-member body. We have 18 members there, and 4 state senators who are of Mexican-American descent, Latino heritage. And this is a tremendous growth over the last 25 years, or more than 25, since 1975, when my ex-husband was elected to the State Assembly in California. He was the youngest member elected at the age of 27. He was one of 4 Mexican-Americans who were elected in the California legislature. So we have, there were 4 members at that time, but 2 state senators, and we now have 18 assembly members with 4 state senators. That's tremendous growth and progress in, a little over a quarter of a century. And so there's much that we can be proud of, and we're only going to continue to see more growth and development in these categories.
Five minutes.
And I'm there. I'm at that point. One of the key things that I think is very important, and one of the themes that I was asked to talk about was fulfilling the promise, unity, strength, and leadership And I maintain again that we live in this very diverse world. I think during the Olympics back in the 80s, there were 140 languages spoken in this country. We have many more languages that are spoken across the world. We live in a very diverse world where there are tremendous needs. And as we all know, the world needs healing. We need to be able to share our resources more equitably across the globe. We need to love and respect and care for one another. That is why we are here. And that our own Bill of Rights and Constitution lay forth very basic principles: freedom, justice, equality, and liberty for all, not some, all. And we've been moving over the centuries, over the decades, we've been moving closer and closer to the fulfillment of that promise in our Bill of Rights and the Constitution. I maintain that the virtues that that people of Mexican and other Hispanic descent are taught growing up as part of our education are how you are in the world. Educación means something different in Spanish than it does in English. It's not just book learning. It's who you are as a person and how you stand in the world and what your values are, what your virtues are that you practice and develop on a daily basis that make you who you are, not just your titles and your positions. These principles, the 14 principles, respect, responsibility, respect, hard work, loyalty, faith, honesty, prudence, fortitude, all the way to chastity and charity, are what are the building blocks of character. And the beauty of these principles that we're taught in Mexican and Hispanic culture is that these principles are resonant with the principles of our own founding fathers in this country, and they also resonate with the principles of peoples across the globe. So we have tremendous unified principles which can draw us together so that we can begin to solve the problems of the world. We have a huge role that we can play as Hispanics on a global scale, and we are. Because if you think about the fact that you had the Spanish, you had the Arabs in Spain for 7 centuries, we could be segueing and working towards peace in the Middle East and elsewhere just because of our Arabic heritage. And there was a tremendous impact that the Arabs left on Spain, and that then came to Mexico and the New World and spread here as well. So that we look at these unifying principles because they do unify us as a people. They unify us with the principles that the Founding Fathers set forth in the United States. There's no reason for people in this country to be afraid of the typists, of Hispanics, because we have the same principles as our Founding Fathers had. And those principles are what can build bridges to other cultures as well. And so it becomes a situation of empowerment because these principles are driving leadership. They're driving our social organizations. They're driving our families. And they're creating a unified force, not only with the Latinos and the overall U.S. population, but globally across the board. I think of the phrase of Martin Luther King, a man should be honored by his character, qualities of character, known for his qualities of character, not for the color of his skin. And if we only would share that, the 3 major religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, share the same principles. Love your Creator, do good, be good. And we are called, there is no higher calling than to do good in the world. That's why we are here. If we look at the tearing and pulling that's going on in Beltway and in Congress, it leads to despair. The crises that we've been facing in recent years, and certainly over the last couple of decades, are cause for despair. And when our country is divided, when fear is allowed to flourish, when despair seems to make us think that it's impossible to solve our problems, we have to know that this is not true. That there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is each and every one of us as we do good work in the world. That's why we're here, to do good work in the world. And to have these principles of faith and fortitude, of responsibility and respect, and to build those bridges that will unify us across all cultures and continents so that we can flourish as a global planet, so that we're sustainable as a human race. Years ago, in the almost a century, during the Mexican Revolution, Antonio Casa, a philosopher and poet in Mexico, asked Mexican people to show your worth, because they were building a new nation based on democratic principles. They were trying to forge a constitution after the Mexican Revolution. Show them your worth, he said. And I would say we must do the same thing. He also said that to believe is to act, to see, to live. Without the good act, there is no faith or hope. And that is because we are the hands and feet of our Creator in the world. We have to do the work on this planet. Joan Baez, the folk singer, told us the only antidote to action is the antidote to despair. So we must act, and the actions must be based on moral and ethical precepts, such as I write about in It's All in the Frijoles. So we come for a circle to see who we are as Latinos, and the tremendous empowerment base that we have in these principles that we're taught as a people. From the time we're growing up to, rereading and relearning these principles as we go through our lives, and as we read and teach our children the same principles, that we have this tremendous opportunity to step forward and be who we are in the world, and to inspire and act and take those right acts to help change the planet. So the farm worker leader, Cesar Chavez, told us, "Sí se puede." Yes, you can. And together we can help heal and transform this planet, beginning with our own communities and our own country. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, we're going to open it up to questions. Anybody have any questions for Yolanda?
Sure you do. Come on.
Sorry, we'll do it. If you don't want to use the microphone, you don't have to.
Yolanda, I know that you have lived your life being an example of what it is to be a giver. What is your favorite project that you have worked on, either in the past or currently working on, that is sort of your contribution to the world, to the better world?
I think it started when I was in my 20s and became a young activist, Chicana activist, and we formed Comisión Femenil Mexicana Nacional and the Comisión Femenil de Los Ángeles. Out of that group, we developed a number of leaders, including Gloria Molina, who is now a county supervisor. She was the first woman to serve in the California Assembly, first on the City Council, and now on the County Board of Supervisors. Founding that group, spawned my leadership skills and got me out into the world. As a member of Comisión, I founded a child development center, Centro de Niños, which now, almost 40 years later, is still in operation. I'm very proud of that. Of course, my children, who came after that child care center, I didn't know anything about kids then, are my special project, nor did I want to. I was 20-something. I just wanted to do it because we had to have a place for working women to take their children. So my children, and I think most recently, my book, It's All in the Frijoles. I'm very proud of that book that I published in 2000. And most recently, the opening of La Plaza de Cultura y Arte in Vera Street in Los Angeles, which is a cultural center to share the contributions of Mexicans and Mexican Americans to the City of Angels. It's long overdue. We've been working on it for more than 10 years, and we finally opened it. I invite all of you to come to visit.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed your speech. I was just wondering, we read the newspapers every day about the drug cartel in Mexico, and I want to know your thoughts about that, and do you see some resolution?
The U.S. is the demand for drugs. If we didn't demand it here, it would dry up and shrivel overnight. I have traveled to Mexico in recent years, despite the cartels and despite the Juarez situation, and despite the kidnappings and things like that have gone on. And I have always felt safe. I don't take the green and white cabs on the streets. I take a CTO, I call for the cab, I get a number, I do it all correctly that way. And I have never felt a sense of fear in Mexico. And I was just there last year in Coyoacan, and we even went into Mexico City, and I didn't feel fearful. But it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that we are the bad. It's a tragedy that the cartels are disrupting life in Mexico and making things very uncertain for people there. And I've come to the conclusion that the way that we perhaps deal with this, and this is just a shift for me in the last couple of years, I think we need to legalize drugs to take the money out of it, and that is going to dry up the demand for drugs and the huge amount of money that goes into the drug cartels, and they can buy and sell anybody. Not all, but a lot. And I know that things are not being enforced in ways that they might be because so much money is spread around. I live in New Mexico. We're one of the centers of drug traffic in the United States because we're right on the Camino Real, straight north of Chihuahua, Mexico, and from there you can go any place in the country and deliver. And I know that things go on there in certain cities, and I know that law enforcement looks the other way. And it's a terrible tragedy. And I think what they did in Colombia when the people band together to get rid of the drug cartels, they did have that impact in Colombia. Unfortunately, they went to Mexico. And of course, they grow and strengthen this country through the prisons and through the streets and the traffic that goes on. But I think we have to take the money out of it, and that will help dry up the power that the cartels now have. Anybody else?
Yeah, we have one more over here.
So you have a great inspiring story, so I was just curious as to who or what inspires you and why.
What inspires me? Life is an inspiration, and I almost lost mine 2 years ago to an autoimmune illness that apparently causes blindness. And when that happened, one of my spiritual counselors said to me, you know all this, Yolanda, but this is an opportunity for your spiritual growth. I think I've been fortunate to have a deep sense of faith that I've had from the time I was a young child. When Time magazine reported on the cover of the magazine in 1960, don't play with that, was when I was at UCLA. I think I was 20 years old, so I don't remember the year, but it was when I was 20 years old, Time magazine reported, God is dead. And I said, not for me. So I think my sense of faith and my spiritual interest, commitment, practice is really what has inspired me all my life. And of course, my mother, who was a very spiritual woman and who taught me everything I needed to know as an adult, and which I try to pass on to my children. But I think faith is very, very important. And we need to take in, inspiration is taking in, I said, spirit. So we need to take in spirit. However we do that, through poetry, through music, through religion, through a spiritual practice, through whatever it is that inspires us, through serving others, we need to take in spirit, because that will sustain us through anything.
Any other questions? We have one more here.
It's actually more like a comment. Last night I Googled you to read up on you. And I was... yeah, that's why I Googled. And I was doing homework, helping my 8-year-old doing homework for 4th grade. So it was interesting for me to find that I believe, if I read it correctly, you shared with your daughter that you wanted her to love learning, to fall in love with learning, I think is the way you put it. And it was interesting because I always tell my daughter I want her to want to learn. So if she wants to, I think the rest drives itself. So I found that very interesting, and I shared that with her, so I thank you for that.
Well, it is about learning, and as a kid, I was encouraged to learn by my parents. My father always had a newspaper, a magazine, a book. He was a journalist. Always had something. He had note cards, 3x5 note cards that he would take notes on. He always had his pockets full of, this stuff. And he always encouraged me to learn. And I loved it. I used to go to the library. I used to have a lot of animals. I used to carry sacks of grain home to feed the animals. And I'd also go to the library and I'd come home with 10 books in the summertime, and read all those books. I was an only child. I mean, that was my books were my friends as well as my cousins, but my cousins were around all week. So learning is vital, and it's an ongoing process. We have to continue to learn and continue to explore. And that's how we will transform the planet, is through education, educating ourselves and others.
Thank you. Any more questions?